Hello and welcome to my channel. In this one I'm going to show you how to draw clouds in pastel pencil. I'm going to be working on a slightly unusual format this time, about 5 inches in width and 12 inches in height, because I wanted to show the shape of this tall towering column of clouds. So let's start. I'm first going to sketch the shape of the hills in the distance to indicate where the line of the horizon will be. That's where the sky ends, so I'm going to leave that part as it is now. I'm going to work on that bottom part a little bit later. Now I'm going to focus on the sky and the clouds. The first thing I'm going to do is roughly sketch out the shape of this column of clouds, this group of clouds. It doesn't have to be super detailed at this point. I'm just doing this, and most of this will be kind of smudged a little bit, but I'm doing it to give myself a rough idea about the shape of the cloud so that I can work around it with a blue pastel pencil. So I'm starting to work with a blue pastel, and by the way, I'm using Kohinoor pastel pencils. Those are the ones that I have, and they're pretty good because they're pretty vibrant and soft, but I don't have a great range of colors. This one is like a lighter phthalo blue, I suppose. I'm going to mix in some other colors as well. First I got to cover this part of the sky, and then I'm going to work on the clouds. Of course I need to cover it relatively thoroughly, because I need to have a sufficient amount of material before I can start blending. And I'm going to blend with my fingers. It's not the most precise tool, but it works pretty well because you can cover large areas very quickly, and it pushes, your finger pushes in that pastel dust very nicely, creating for some smooth transitions. The paper I'm working on is UART 800 paper. It's sanded pastel paper, and the color of the paper is like a light sand color. So a little bit darker than white, I suppose. The bigger problem with this lighter paper is overcoming the lighter background when you need to put in darker colors, but with pastels that's usually not much of a problem because they blend easily and they cover large areas very quickly. So now I'm starting to work on the clouds. I'm going to work with a white pastel pencil this time, but I'm actually going to use 2 white pencils. Both of them are Kohinoor, but this is the Kohinoor white pastel pencil, and this one is the Kohinoor white charcoal pencil. I honestly don't really know what the difference is in the composition of the two, but it just looks like this white charcoal pencil is a bit more opaque, and it tends to stick to the paper a little bit better. And the reason why I use both is because the white charcoal pencil, it's a little bit whiter when I put it on top of other layers, so that can sometimes be important. Anyway, now I'm going to draw some shadow areas on that cloud because I need to break up that large shape of clouds into smaller and smaller shapes. I'm going to use a couple of different light blue colors or lighter colors, like a light cool gray and that light blue pastel pencil. And I'm going to blend them in using the white pastel pencil. So let's do that again. First I start with a little bit of this light cool gray, or I can just use the blue, we'll see. But I've put in a little bit of this light cool gray first, and then I'm putting down a little bit of this light blue. Now as you can see, when I put this down like this, there's a little bit too much texture. It doesn't really look like a fluffy cloud. So to soften that, I just go in over that with a white pastel pencil, and you can see how much softer that is. I can always go back in and add a little bit of darker color if I want some of these shadows to appear deeper. And by increasing that range of value, I will actually make the clouds appear more three-dimensional. So I'm starting to define some of the shadow areas on those clouds. By the shadow areas, you can already tell that the light source is coming from above and a little bit more from the left. This is often the case in many of my landscapes because, I don't know, it's just more convenient for me that way. But as you can see, we're going to have to stay consistent with that light source. Now, here I'm going to put down the white pastel pencil as the base color, and then I'm gently going to shade those areas which need to be darker. When you put the white pastel underneath, that also allows for smooth blending, because you know that the top layer will be influenced by the lighter layer underneath. And that way I can just drag my bluish pencil like so and create some soft shadow areas without actually having to rework them too much or blend over them too much. So when it comes to blending pastel on this surface on UART sanded paper, your finger is obviously the best blending tool if you can use it, and you can only use it for those larger areas which don't require a lot of precision. But for smaller areas, like for example this larger part of this shadow area of the cloud, I can just dab on that with my finger a little bit. I don't have to worry about smaller shapes that much just yet. But when you want to work on smaller details, well, then you have to use some more precise blending tools. There are color shapers, those tiny spongy tools. You can also try tortillons or brushes, but personally I find that the best blending method for those smaller areas is just to use a lighter pencil on top of the darker pencil. Sometimes you can go back and forth. Sometimes you can put in a little bit more of the darker pencil back in if you feel like something needs to be a little bit darker. But in my opinion, the best blending method, and the one that you will see me using here over and over again, is simply using the white pastel on top of those bluish areas to blend them in and to create softer transitions. Anyway, here I'm adding a little bit of darker blue to that shadow area, because I want this part of the cloud which is facing away from the light source to be even darker. So I went in with an even darker phthalo blue, something like a middle phthalo blue. I don't really know how to describe them because I don't know the exact range or the exact name or the designation in the Kohinoor range. And no doubt you will be using a different brand of pastel pencils. Maybe some of you are using these, I don't really know. But also you can try this with soft pastel, with soft pastel sticks. I mean, that also could work, because it's not like this is a type of drawing that requires a huge amount of detail and precision and straight lines and things like that. So you can easily pull this off using soft pastels as well. Maybe it would be even faster, who knows. But this is not a very large format. I think these pastel pencils will do just fine. Anyway, I'm starting to work on the second group of clouds, which is slightly in front of that tall one. I mean, it's the same shape more or less, but they're kind of bunched together, and as you can see now, I'm trying to break them into smaller shapes. And some of these transitions in value are very, very subtle. But I always have to make sure that the viewer understands what is in front of what, and where one object ends and the other one begins. So now I'm just going to put down a little bit more white pastel to the rest of the shape of this cloud to establish that base lighter color again, and then I'm going to draw some bluish shadow areas, just like I did on that top cloud, the tallest cloud at the top. So now I'm starting to add these bluish shadow areas. And again, trying to stay consistent with the light source. And the way you can sort of make this easier for yourself when you're drawing clouds is to think about clouds just like any other object, because clouds are 3D objects and they have their light side and their shadow side, they have their volume and shape and size and everything. So you will use shading to describe their shape just like you would any other object, like a sphere or a cube or any other object, really. It just they're a little bit more complex because there are a bunch of smaller shapes within a larger shape. But you can always draw the larger shape first, then shade some of the larger areas first, establishing that larger contrast between the lighter side and the shadow side. And then you can always go back in, adding some smaller details, like some smaller, deeper shadow areas or darker shadow areas. Like, for example, this side of the cloud is a little bit darker, or at least I'm trying to make it even darker so that it would stand out against the background of that taller cloud behind it. And for blending, I'm going to use lighter pencils on top of the darker ones. Now you can see how I achieved a very nice contrast with that cloud behind it. You can really feel like the one at the bottom is in front. And now, as I've already explained, you can just go back in and draw some smaller shapes or indications of smaller shapes, like the top of those smaller spherical and all kinds of other shapes is catching a little bit of light from above, and that's why it's lighter. And I'm doing this with this white charcoal pencil, which I already explained feels a little bit lighter and more opaque than the regular Kohinoor pastel pencil, at least when I put it on top of other layers. It feels like it's a bit more opaque. I could just use the regular white pastel, but I feel like maybe some of the white areas wouldn't be as white, and I wouldn't get such a nice range of value. And in order to get such clean, lighter areas, I would maybe have to do even a little bit of erasing to lift up some of the darker pastel dust first, and then to put in the white. So there are all kinds of tricks you can use if you're limited with your materials and colors, but you know, that's just something you have to learn as you go along. Anyway, I'm starting to work on the bottom portion of these clouds, and no doubt this bottom portion will be a little bit simpler in terms of colors and shapes, and it won't be as interesting or as complex as the top part. But you know, that's the general idea. I want that top part of the towering clouds to capture the most focus or the attention from the viewer. That's also where we have the largest amount of detail and contrast and things like that. Here at the bottom, I'm going to put down a little bit more blue, so I'm going to start with a blue as a base color, and then make it lighter and blend it as necessary. So I've reached the line of the horizon, those hills at the bottom. Adjusting the camera for me was a little bit tricky because the paper is much longer than it is wide. You usually don't work on such unusual formats, but here I thought that it would be suitable for this type of landscape where the focus is on the clouds, and it's probably the best way to using that format is narrow format, tall format is the best way to show and maybe emphasize the shape of those clouds. Anyway, I am working on the bottom portion of the clouds. As you can see here, we have contrasts that are a little bit more subtle, differences in value that are a little bit more subtle, and a little bit fewer of those small shapes. Anyway, I'm starting to work on the hills or the mountains in the distance. This part will be a little bit simpler and a little bit quicker. So I'm going to start with a green. I'm going to start with a little bit of bright green and add some darker colors and some bluish tones on top of that. And at the bottom I'm going to draw a few slopes which are maybe a little bit more exposed to the sunlight, and those will be a little bit brighter and lighter. I'm going to add another slightly darker green here, just mixing it up a little bit. And then I'm going to add some bluish tones on top of that. I'm going to use this slightly darker blue because I need the top part of those mountains to stand out against the background. And I'm going to make the edge, the upper edge, a little bit irregular, like maybe there are some irregular shapes or maybe even trees on the top of those hills or peaks. Anyway, I also added a touch of black pastel to make some parts of it even darker, but then to modify the overall color I added a little bit more lighter blue. And sometimes I will blur the edge a little bit around some of these mountains, like maybe I'm just trying to imitate that atmospheric effect and maybe the effect of some lower hanging clouds and maybe if some rain in the distance, who knows what. Anyway, I am shading some of these slopes with a little bit more value, adding a bit more of the black pastel pencil, making sure that the shadow side is darker, but also that there is more variation in value so that I can explain the shape of the terrain. But I always add a touch of blue for those distant peaks because they will appear bluish because of that atmospheric effect. Here at the bottom I'm going to add a little bit more of this brighter green, and I'm going to keep the color in this bottom portion a little bit brighter and lighter because I want it to stand out against the slopes in the background. I'm just going to put down a little bit more of that bright green and blend that in with my finger. And I'll work on the suggestions of details and smaller shapes a little bit later. So with landscapes, the good thing is that you don't have to worry about every single tiny detail. You can just focus on the larger shapes, larger things first, and then maybe later, if you feel like it, you can add a few details or suggestions of details here and there. So just adding a little bit more of this darker color in there. I want the slopes in the back to be a bit darker with just a few lighter details like so. I'm just dragging this lighter green pencil here and there, making some suggestions of those parts of the slopes which are a little bit lighter. I put my signature in the lower right corner, and you can't really see all of the drawing. I'm going to have to zoom out a little bit, and that's it. Anyway, don't forget to check out my other videos and give me a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching this one, and if you want to see longer videos and much more content, you should check out my Patreon. Bye for now.